We can have more of all the things that we need from the earth without destroying the earth. And that means we could actually have more space for wilderness. Now, true wealth is also having the time to breathe properly, to get enough exercise, to be able to enjoy life. That's true wealth. And when you talk to people on their deathbed, what's been most important for people have been their relationships to other people. So to have more time to care for children, to care for the aged, to care for one another and ourselves, that is a central part of it. It's the blindness of these men who don't understand that everything we need comes from the earth. The blindness that now believes we can create something better than the earth, and we're going to create something better than people now with robots. It's mad, it's totally delusional, and it's not going to work. So in the long run, for sure, that system isn't going to work.
What happens when we localize, reconnect to the earth and the soil? What starts to happen between human beings?
I mean, what happened is so wonderful. As people start connecting over soil and seed, and even getting their hands in the dirt, there's just a profound healing. It's this sense of coming home. It's how we evolved. We evolved for tens of thousands of years connected to this. And, you know, if you look at the cultural diversity we had, we could see how central also the different food cultures were, and how in virtually every culture we celebrated over food and eating together and preparing our special dishes. So, first of all, it's everything from new market gardens, community gardens, to farmers' markets, to co-ops. But what people don't realize is that we're actually creating an economic pressure on farmers to diversify. When we shorten the distances, the smaller market doesn't want just a ton of straight carrots. The dominant market now is pressuring for bigger and bigger quantities, and not only the same product, but the same size. And also, just like with people, you're being asked to have them absolutely straight, the same size, no blemishes, completely artificially perfect. So that puts huge strain on the farmer, you know, to use lots of chemicals, etc. Now you have a market where the farmers who have been farming and selling to supermarket chains or to the central market, they say, oh, when you started a farmer's market, it's like entering a new galaxy. And very often the farmers would be quite conservative, and very often the people who are coming to shop at the farmer's market are more left or green. And it's like this beautiful marriage where suddenly the farmers are having people appreciate what they do. They even like a little bit of a blemish because it shows that he hasn't been spraying so much. They also absolutely don't care that everything should be exactly the same size. And then you have that they love the consumer, especially. There's no need for plastic at all.
What I hear you saying is that actually globalization leads to less diversity, and localization leads to more diversity. Could you speak about that for?
It's such a good question. I love that question because on the surface, it really can appear that way, you know, and this is what big business marketed in this last phase of globalization, that this is bringing us all together and it was going to lift all boats, meaning everywhere in the world it was going to lead to greater prosperity. And they even, you know, you even had the CEO, I think, of McDonald's saying that, you know, two countries that have McDonald's never go to war with each other. So really the thinking has been the belief that integrating economic activity is a good idea. Again, on the surface makes sense, but people haven't realized that what it meant was giving more and more power and wealth to a few global corporations. And these corporations have systematically been promoting monocultures. First of all, it's been introducing exactly the same chemicals in agriculture, most of them toxic and unnecessary, and they've been pressuring farmers to become bigger and bigger, merge, and become bigger and bigger monocultures. When you do that, you're creating something so unnatural that it needs chemicals. Totally goes against nature. Then, if you look honestly all around the world, what they're introducing is a human consumer monoculture. And when I started this work back in the 70s, that was with an advert of blue-eyed, blonde, white people being what everybody should aspire to. And that meant that all around the world, people with darker skin were buying skin lightening creams, even wearing blue contact lenses. I realized even in Sweden, where the majority were blonde and blue-eyed, it was leading to this self-consciousness and always feeling that you're not beautiful enough. So actually, especially in America, there was even more damage. There were even more people doing all kinds of dangerous surgery and more traumatized by the idea you have to be this one perfect model. So that's also a big invitation for us all to work together across the world, because once you see these things happening in the supposedly richest countries, and you see that the trauma, the depression, the alcoholism, and the drug addiction is even worse there, that gives you a very different picture. Anyway, this monoculture now, what's very tricky is that if you look at a Coca-Cola advert now, they love to have people of every skin color to actually be showing diversity. But it's actually all part of an urban consumer monoculture creating these images of perfection that nobody can live up to. It started from these quite unique experiences in Ladakh, or Little Tibet. It's part of Tibet that belongs politically to India. And what was unique was that Ladakh had been so untouched. Even missionaries who'd come hundreds of years earlier hadn't been able to make them go away from their deep self-respect, from their way of doing things, their identity. Then later on in the modern era, when the media and so on have had so much influence, they were sealed off. So when I arrived there, this is a place on the planet in the mid-70s that's never even heard of the Beatles, or, it's still in its own world. To experience a truly functioning, ecologically, spiritually based society of about 100,000 people spread in villages in quite a big area in a desert. And that within a year, I was absolutely convinced that it had to do both with a worldview and a spiritual reminder of the interdependence of everything, also a way of life. So it became very obvious that it had to do with having a much more localized way of life, much more deeply embedded in knowing that I depend on that river, I depend on those trees. We are interdependent. When I care for them, they also care for me. And so I very quickly learned that humanity needs to move back to that basic principle of being more connected to the living world, to nature. But that also means, maybe I didn't realize that right away, but that means that we need to be more interdependent with each other. And so it was this deep connection to others and to nature, which I saw was so connected also to a deeper sense of self, a connected sense of self, not a fearful self.
Just emphasize, what do you mean by re-indigenization?
Yeah, what I mean is essentially now, starting where we are in the West, in a place like Sweden, we're talking about a way of life which has been, through modernity, has been a process of pushing people away from the land into bigger and bigger urban sprawls or high-rise cities. And it has meant that in terms of actual production from nature, essentially in farming, industry or fishing, we're talking about 1% of the population. Because what's happened, this process of moving us away, has meant we become more and more dependent, essentially on global corporations. The global side of it actually started before the modern economy, with enclosures and slavery, and that set up a structure that benefited global elites in so-called poor countries as well. and in the Western world, who were trading, among other things, in slaves. And the slaves were pushed onto production for the traders. Big monocultures of tea or cocoa or coffee or mining to suit the needs of a global elite that was then industrializing, particularly in the West, in Europe. And there, people were pushed off the land too, to become the urban factory workers and then later consumers. And that fundamental structure of shifting communities' ways of life away from a more land-based and community-based way of living, that was destroying the indigenous. This essential aspect of the indigenous was much stronger, bigger community, not a little nuclear family. No mention of emissions from trade. None at all. Not allowed. It's holy. And instead, you and I, as individuals, shouldn't drive our cars, shouldn't get into a plane. And in fact, it has actually set back the global movement that we need of much deeper dialogue between different countries to understand what's going on. Because so many thoughtful, conscious people think, oh, I shouldn't travel. In the meanwhile, those who are promoting mass consumerism and mass tourism are traveling more than ever.
Interesting mix of hope and sadness.
Yes.
I really do, because on the one hand, what you're saying really rings so true to me, and I have the ears to hear it. And then I'm also hearing, well, these global corporations, and maybe we can get into that now, have the governments wrapped around their little fingers. And if they're always delegitimizing the moves we are trying to make, what can we do to address those?
Yeah, I guess seeing the miraculous truth that people were managing to create some alternatives all around the world. Like even in China, this is a little farm on the edge of Beijing called Little Donkey Farm, seeing how people also would flock to that. And so I guess my faith in ultimately the power of life it's the blindness of these men who don't understand that everything we need comes from the earth, and the blindness that now believes we can create something better than the earth, and we're going to create something better than people now with robots. It's mad, it's totally delusional, and it's not going to work. So in the long run, for sure, that system isn't going to work. Now in the short run, for me, it's all a question of what's in people's minds. It's all about what information they have. It's all about really information, because we can't give everyone the experience of being part of the more localized, nature-based way of living. But for me, I see a huge opportunity now for those people who are aware and who have tasted both the more nature-based and the artificial and the more community-based versus the loneliness and separation. There is a huge community of people like that. We're talking about billions, because just in the food movement, the Via Campesina, for instance, has 200 million small farmers, and that doesn't include, so many people who don't even know about it. Doesn't include all the people who suddenly started gardening. I'm talking about even CEOs who suddenly discovered the joy, started learning about this reality of the earth and how the earth is alive and what a joy it is to be connected to her. So I think the possibility over the next few years is to be able to raise enough funds. It's absolutely key that we have enough money to create materials, like your report, like our films, but then also funding to push them through, because we're talking about blockages in the mainstream media, also in the social media, that don't let this message through because the really big money is blocking it. But when we realize that the number of people who are pushing for this artificial monoculture and it's a deadliness, it's going against life, the principle of life. It's going against the needs of these 8 billion people. It's going against their own needs, which is also why the typical very powerful CEO the great stock market trader. They need a lot of cocaine. They need a lot of stuff to pump them up because it's so unnatural. It's so speedy. So we have essentially less than 1% of humanity pushing in the direction of not just anti-life, but we should talk about how it's connected to the war machine as well. This system blindly just wants what's lucrative at the top. So it's all the time extracting to the top. And the most lucrative is war. And that's also why in, the film, The Social Dilemma, they talk about how in the social media, the algorithms know that hatred, violent conflict is going to lead to more buttons pushed and more wealth to the top. So, those CEOs from Silicon Valley, many of them won't let their children near a screen. They are warning humanity about continuing blindly in this direction. And we're seeing a reaction now. They're beginning to ban mobile phones and so on for children. But it's not nearly enough. We're going to need much more awakening and much more of a democratic process and a discussion about what kind of future does the majority want? Are we committed to democracy or not? If we are, everyone who votes should have a chance. What we've been pushed into in this era of globalization is voting with our consumer dollar, which is fundamentally elitist. That means those who have the most money have more votes, so the poor have no vote. And so anyone who cares about justice and democracy needs now to shift away from this narrative of what we do as individual consumers immediately. And I want people even to say, yeah, you drive your car while critiquing the dependence on the car. Drive your car to a community center to discuss how are we going to together demand that we have light rail or alternatives, that we have more bicycle paths. In the meanwhile, I'm forced into driving my car. And in fact, it's something I've been saying for 30 years. And I used to explain, if in America you say don't drive your car, it's like saying cut your legs off. Society is based around the car, and more. And our taxes are going to subsidizing the road infrastructure from A to Z, even research at universities. We're subsidizing what we don't want. The information we need is the big picture that connects the dots. Bits of information about this horrible thing and it's your fault and you're left alone to solve it. No wonder people don't want to listen to that anymore. And the information they're not getting is that they're actually being made poorer by the same policies that are poisoning the earth and drowning us in mountains of plastic. The very same policies that lead to their poverty, and poverty meaning they need to be reminded because they're being told all the time they're doing so well. But actually, when we talk about consciousness, we don't allow that to be just the deeper personal awakening to the wisdom of all the spiritual traditions, all the root of the major religions too is this profound wisdom about love and love being the energy that connects us. It's a reminder usually about the oneness of all life. And that has been brought into the Western world. In my life as an activism, I've seen that very much being brought in. It's been very important, but it's not enough. And it's actually, I feel, ended up catching people with the idea that this is the only thing that will work. And that means they have ignored the fact that to remain at peace, to even have time to meditate, even to have time to be in nature, to enjoy it, that has been shrinking for people. And so ignoring the reality of the outside structural change and only pointing to the inner spiritual work, it's been counterproductive. But I love that the wisdom of it has also been brought into more activist groups, because it's vital. But what I'm seeing is this opportunity to build on that, to say that deep breath, a bit of calm, and learning now so many very clear ways that we can calm our nervous system. Neuroscience is bringing us so much evidence about everything from breath to singing together to exercise. It's so clear what we need to do. that is part of what we teach, that's something that's needed. But together with that deep breath, be willing to just look at the big picture. Don't run away from it. Don't feel that looking at the big system means that you're going to feel more disempowered. We're saying it will make you feel more empowered. It will make you more aware of the power that we, the people, have. And you'll, maybe above all, you'll also not be there blaming yourself all the time, because that's what this system is doing, is pointing the finger at the individual.
Very interesting
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah, trapping them in this treadmill. And then, it breaks my heart to see people who, particularly here in England, not that long ago, there were, middle-class people who had never been activists at all, but they just felt enough is enough, and they were going and blocking traffic as part of Extinction Rebellion. And I remember people in my organization were all excited, oh, Extinction Rebellion is getting a lot of media coverage. I say, yeah, it's because it doesn't threaten the system at all. On the contrary, it's helped to reinforce it. It's actually helped to create more depression, more powerlessness, and it was because it was not based on the big picture. It wasn't even based on understanding the misinformation we've had from the climate narrative. And the whole, trade in carbon, net zero, all of that has to be questioned. And that doesn't mean that what's also happened is now some people have so lost trust in government, particularly after COVID, and so they now think, oh, there is no climate change. Climate's always been changing. Keep trying to say to people like that, how can you believe that the fossil fuels that you recognize were behind the pesticides, the chemical fertilizers that have led to desertification, that the pesticides we know affect our health? How could the emissions from that not affect the climate at all? It just seems crazy. Yeah, but sadly, if we don't get this bigger picture information out, and remember, information has become more and more narrow, more and more refusing to look at the bigger picture. So it's the informing people about the big picture. That's what I see, not only as the big hope, but I see that the things that are working to heal people and to heal the environment, they are all big picture. They're not necessarily born of people recognizing the big global economy picture, but as they engage, they totally understand and experience the interconnectedness between humans and the rest of life. They arrive at that often through health pride maybe, and they have to start listening more to their body, their gut, and try to find that local, organic, healthy food instead of the supermarket food. The corporate food system in its totality is the biggest cause of ill health of every kind. And I would argue the biggest cause of environmental breakdown when you add up all the various dimensions of it.
So for you, because I hear you also saying that there's actually more wealth to be found when we localize.
Yes.
What does wealth mean? Because I think many people that would be questioning this would say, for example, in the trade unions, well, we need to negotiate with the corporations in order to get our minimum wages up. So they're in this where they think there's no wealth to be found outside of the system. But you're proposing maybe a new paradigm of our understanding of wealth. So could you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, and that's not just what a lot of people think, which is we can make do with less. I'm saying that, first of all, at the very foundation of the real economy, the earth, when we have diversified, small-scale production with lots of people involved in farming, in fishery, and forestry, we can produce much more with less land. We can use less water, less space, and produce more. This dominant industrial system actually produces less food per acre. And we're talking about food that people need to eat. We're not just talking about biomass. We're talking about the reality that when you have the diversity, you also have things ripening at different times. You can extend the growing season. The diversity protects you against pests. I mean, so we can literally increase the real wealth of what we get from the earth. Now, if we also allow a deindustrialization of a lot of production, so that we would allow a support for carpenters to be producing more out of wood, if we would allow that also to extend into the building industry. And sounds very radical for most people, but if we would realize that even in Sweden, there are still houses standing that had only sun-dried brick. Hundreds of years they've stood. And if you look honestly, many of those old buildings are far more beautiful than the fossil fuel, cement, steel, plastic. It turns out also that research in Germany has seen that wooden pillars are safer in fire than steel. The steel melts. But a lot of this information, again, is covered up. And now young ecological architect students are taught, we've got to go high-rise, we've got to go city center, there are too many people. And the image of everyone concentrating in the city, on the surface you can understand why people believe that, but they're not looking honestly at the footprint of those cities. They're not looking now that that footprint is global. And they're not seeing that factory in China, in Indonesia, in Mexico, with a huge ecological footprint. That's part of this. And then all the transport. I mean, it's just... Anyway, so if we would really wake up to that, allowing people... To me, I see it as a human liberation front from an imprisoning system that has told us that the only way we're going to get our food, our clothing, our shelter is from these global traders from the top down. And they've created an artificial scarcity of jobs and an artificial scarcity of goods. The scarcity of jobs, too, is just so tragic to see. Like India, very often people who've got a college degree are coming back into the workplace and asking for jobs as cleaners in government institutions. So it's really unbelievable.
What is true wealth for you? What does it mean?
Well, I mean, first of all, true wealth. Let's first of all just come back to looking at the fact that we can have more of all the things that we need from the earth without destroying the earth. And that means we could actually have more space for wilderness. Now, true wealth is also having the time to breathe properly, to get enough exercise, to be able to enjoy life. That's true wealth. And when you talk to people on their deathbed, what's been most important for people have been their relationships to other people. So to have more time to care for children, to care for the aged, to care for one another and ourselves, that is a central part of true wealth. And the time poverty is, anyone who looks honestly will see, day by day, increasing dramatically as part of this system. Why? Again, exactly because of the same policy. So, and now we're basically running after technology, trying to keep up with technology. So we need to really have a pause, a deep breath, and start these conversations and spread tools, films that can encourage people to come together and discuss so that in their context and in their lives, they can relate this picture that they just have not had access. I don't even think that in intelligence, they are thinking we're actually making people poorer and poorer. This is going to lead to 100% urbanization, killing off all farmers. They're not necessarily thinking that. Blindly looking, we've got to be ahead of the Chinese and the Russians. And I'm praying and also trying to reach some very powerful people. So I think there's this machine-like marriage between intelligence and Silicon Valley and the financial casino. And in the financial casino, we've allowed, and not we, our governments have allowed banks to create more and more money as debt to them. Understanding the big picture, again, comes back to having deeper ecological knowledge. And, we've been robbed of that. And getting deeper ecological knowledge now is not enough. We need to combine it with a better understanding of how the dominant system, which from the outset ignored that. We're talking about a science and a worldview which really thought that the only truth was through their type of science. And it's been getting worse and worse in terms of science for profit.
If you could pinpoint one thing in the global system that you think is a priority for us to tackle right now and that is doable, what would you say it is?
Absolutely, the trade treaties.
Okay, can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, it would be right now a wake up, so that what's been happening is that in these trade negotiations, governments with corporations, so corporations ordering them to do, as they say, or they get taken to court, right? So we need a wake up from the social and environmental movements, and by environmental, everything, anyone concerned with climate, with plastic, biodiversity, whatever. Social would include women's, peace, every aspect of concern, the elderly, it's all getting split into categories. And very sadly, also it's being split into now too much romanticizing indigenous and demonizing white men. All of that politics of identity is counterproductive, so that now we're really talking about all of humanity. So those movements need to wake up to the bigger picture. And they then need to be at the table with governments instead of the corporation. And now it's deciding how to, without blowing up, McDonald's or Monsanto or anything, how to start shifting towards regulating them and taxing them. And that could be a process of a gentle landing. And that would and should include the weapons industry and, of course, the financial casino. So with society now able to start regulating what would... So in my book, Local is Our Future, I do talk a bit about it. I haven't outlined details because I feel until people are ready to really look at it, there's no point. But when it comes down to much of the detail of how should we grow and produce and manufacture, that needs to be progressively localized. And it could be even today, if people understood, they would allow local communities far more power over some of the aspects of this. And like I was saying, even the monitoring for local organic and all that would be much better done locally. The distant regulations have also remind those who have a lot of diversity, it becomes far harder, more bureaucratic. It's been structurally going in the wrong direction terribly. Anyway, so there's a way of differentiating between empowering our governments to take power over the global empire versus empowering them to have more power over us. We can simultaneously demand meaningful decentralization from central national government, which we need, while demanding that with our help, they start controlling. Ultimately, I believe that if people really understood everything, they would demand that Mitsubishi stays Japanese, General Motors American, Volvo Swedish, and that they then operate under democratically determined regulation. A lot of people believe that we wouldn't have the phone, we wouldn't have the airplane, we wouldn't have the cars without these free multinationals. Absolutely untrue. There's no reason why there couldn't be collaboration, even between businesses and between government, needed, as it's seen to be needed for industrial production. With industrial production, there is definitely an efficiency of scale. But when we understand that when it comes to producing food, all the basic needs, industrial production works against us. We're talking about a very different approach. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Do you have any sense of what a new labor paradigm could look like and what the labor union's role in that can be? Maybe it's not what you've looked at specifically, but is there any message there?
Yeah, good question. Well, certainly for most people in the world, the left or labor is seen to have these values of really caring about people, of wanting a better distribution of wealth. But what they've been lacking in almost the whole industrial era has been ecological literacy. So what you're talking about trying to do is vital. But I think that hopefully would be done in a very pragmatic and practical way. And I feel what I'm offering is pragmatic and practical. It's not just about the incredible spiritual wealth and the well-being of humans, as they connect to nature, but it is about the actual production of more from nature, but in a kinder and gentler way. And there is a huge opportunity for labor to shift direction. The message that people needs to be, we are concerned about you, we're concerned about the way that you've been working harder and harder, as the primary message. And then starting to, well, I mean, it depends how much money they would have behind them and how brave they would be, but if they were to spell out what I'm saying, I am almost certain they would have huge support. I know that wherever I go in the world, if I say, we think global corporations have too much wealth and power, and we would prefer governments to shift all the supports for them to supporting local economies around the world. Wouldn't you like that to be happening in your part of the world? The majority will say yes. You see, they're being pinned into this situation of, local food is too expensive, it's elitist. Yeah. And that's not true. And so if you have a government body that's actually looking honestly at what's happening, they have a huge opportunity to put the picture together. What I've been recommending is that we might see what I call a breakaway strategy, which is that some smaller countries like Sweden link up with other countries, maybe New Zealand, maybe and as a group start a discussion of how they are going to support each other in reducing this dependence and blackmailing by the global casino. Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say is there's a better way, it's a much kinder way, and it's also generates more wealth for more people. And I just want to thank you so much for, in a society where we're afraid of, becoming elders with wisdom, really having stepped into that and being a role model for our generation that are hungry for this kind of wisdom and doing what we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.